Hello, and welcome to Decipher This, a podcast about music and technology from Ensemble Decipher. I'm Joey Bohigian.
I'm Niloufar and Nourbakhsh.
And we're here today with Kamala Sankaram.
Hello.
So, Kamala, she's praised as strikingly original. Kamala Sankaram moves freely between the worlds of experimental music and contemporary opera. Known for pushing the boundaries of opera, Kamala's work has included several pieces fusing Indian classical music with the operatic form. The first virtual reality opera, several telematic operas, an opera with live data mining of the audience, and most recently a 10-hour opera for trees of Prospect Park. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast, Kamala. How are you doing today?
I am okay. It's nice to see you.
So we like to start off by asking how you got started with using technology in music. It's interesting, all the different paths that people take. So if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I think it comes from having been kind of a club kid. When I first moved to New York, I was friends with a lot of DJs, like experimental DJs who would cut their own records to play at clubs. And I think because of that, and also I'm very good friends with Peter Kern, who currently has a blog called Create Digital Media. And so when Ableton Live was first developed, we were some of the first people who started using it, or the first people that I knew that were using it. So I've had a version of Ableton since version 1. So I guess I kind of fell into it just from that, but also I have always had an interest in technology sort of from a philosophical standpoint. How has it changed the way that people interact, and how has it affected modern life, and that's actually what my doctoral research was about how reading on the internet changes the way that people comprehend information. So I've always had an interest in technology and an interest in making operatic works in particular, but theater for modern audiences. And it happens that because technology is so interwoven into the way that we all move through the world now, it made sense to start really including it in the conception of the pieces from the beginning.
Yeah, I'm curious too, since you mentioned the role that technology is playing in all our lives right now. How has the pandemic and doing everything virtually affected your work? I know you did a Zoom opera recently.
It's interesting because I think I was one of the first people to make something over Zoom. And it's because back in March of 2020, everyone that I knew had just had all of their work canceled. And I had a bad feeling that it wasn't going to be a few weeks like everyone was saying before we were back. So it really started just as, if we're going to be in this for a long time, how do we do this? How can we actually perform together? So it was a practical thing more than anything, because, I really believe that any new medium has its own affordances for a performance practice. So you're not necessarily going to be able to do what you do in other media. So that really turned out to be true for Zoom, because I know about how there is latency, but I didn't realize how bad it would be on Zoom in particular. And since that was really the only platform available at that point, we sort of developed a way of making work that overcame the latency rather than trying to fight it. And what's interesting about that is that it's actually found its way into work that I'm doing now, because I really liked the flexibility that it gave the performers in order to think like actors. As composers, one of the things that we have to do when we're setting text is decide what the delivery of the text is going to be, which words are emphasized, the pacing of it. And that's really what an actor is supposed to be doing in preparing a role. So we are taking that away from the singers to a large degree. And it was nice to give it back to them because they did things that I didn't expect.
That is so interesting. Just following up on that, I feel like there were so many aspects of the pandemic, including using this virtual mode and connecting through networks with each other, is going to still remain with us after coming back into in-person situations. Do you think like the opera world is going to take some of that digital production and performances that they carried out through the pandemic is going to continue?
I hope so. And I think so. Thus far, it looks like some of the upgrades that they made out of necessity are going to stick around, because the opera world has been one of the last fields that has been really resistant to recording and video. And I think, I understand having an opera house is this giant piece of real estate, and in order to outfit it for live streaming and in order to mic it properly, that means having an extra staff person, because the people that you already have probably, and I've heard this from people who were forced to learn how to do this very quickly, it's a lot. You really do need an extra person to handle it. So I think that's sort of where we find ourselves now, is that we're coming back. Everyone has realized, yes, it is a good thing to have recordings and videos available, but you cannot keep forcing your other staff people to do it. You really do need to find someone else to do it. And so I think whether or not it continues is going to come down to that one thing. Can you actually hire someone else to take on this extra responsibility? But I do hope it continues, because I think the one thing that we have all realized is that your reach is so much greater if you can increase accessibility. Like it is, we all love going and hearing live music, but it's not possible for a lot of people. And especially for contemporary works, if you have your piece performed in a black box theater, you have maybe 100 audience members, you get 3 performances. So that's 300 people possible who can come and see your work. Whereas if you put it online, then that increases exponentially, and it's better for the life of the piece in the end, because it increases the likelihood that someone else is going to see it who wants to perform it.
Guys, can you hear me? You're all frozen. Guys, can you hear me? You're all frozen.
I know
Their
some of us
eyes
have to go.
We don't
I
simply
will
replace the built environment. Tests on the built environment.
Their eyes burst, their
We reiterate the built
They take you to a place with a lot of other people.
Tell you, I'm with another
Their
group.
eyes
I know some of us
burst.
have to go. Another meeting. Okay. I'm with Redneck Revolt.
Whoa. There. This is
We replace it with miso dressing.
Okay.
Or
eyes.
a hydraulic
burst.
I'm with
swan.
Redneck Revolt.
We replace it with miso
Their
dressing.
eyes
Or
burst.
a hydraulic
Their
swan.
eyes burst.
Daddy's working. Daddy's working. I can get you a gun. I think we pick it up from here. Daddy's work. I think we pick it.
Doomsday Machine! The movie is called Doomsday Machine.
You've been using technology in opera for quite a while now. We wanted to ask about some of your other operas, such as like the Parksville Murders, which is a virtual reality opera, or Looking at You, where you're doing live data mining of the audience.
Yeah. So I guess all of these sort of come from initially thinking about what the story is and how best to support the story. The Parksville Murders was brought as a virtual reality project from the beginning. So that one's a little bit different in that my way into it was thinking about the role of the audience. Like, if we were in this space, why are we there? And that's kind of how the story evolved, is that we take on the character of these evil watchers who it's basically the male gaze kills people is the moral of that piece. For Looking at You, Rob Handel and I, the librettist, and I should say the librettist for Parksville is Jerry Dye. Rob Handel and I had been talking about making something about privacy because I was already interested in it, and Rob, at the time the Edward Snowden revelations had just happened, and Rob was really interested in making something about that. Both of us love film noir and spy movies, and so we started there. Let's make something about privacy, and we just did a lot of research and kept finding additional scary things, and the technology kept changing, and from the beginning, I knew that there were two things that I wanted to have in the piece, which is one is that there would be these singing tablet computers. And, that seems easy enough to do, but there was no software that would allow wireless synchronization across tablets. And to my knowledge, the software that was developed to make that possible for our show is still really the only thing that exists that does that. And the other thing, of course, is I think that most people at the time, when we started working on this was 2013, so it was quite a while ago, most people were not really thinking about how easy it was to find information about them online. And so that was the other thing, is we wanted to put their information in the show somehow just to make people aware that we as strangers could find it and put it in our video. So those were the two things that we started out with. And it's just a process of talking to lots of people and finding people who are interested in working on it and making it happen. And that's how we ended up collaborating with privacy researchers at Carnegie Mellon University. And then the people that built the tablet software were two coders from Bandcamp.com. And so, yeah, it was really that concept is what decided the overall dramatic structure of the piece. And that's why it was important to have the technology in mind from the beginning, because we were thinking about what can this tech do? How do we make this story support that? And how does it support the story? And we also wanted to make sure we were getting to the line of scary, but not crossing over into actual harm to people, because our privacy researchers, they can actually find your social security number from the information that they can get about you online. But we decided not to do that. There was a version of the show where we thought we might put the last 4 digits of someone's social security in the video, but that seemed a little too much. So, yeah.
It's like
I'm curious, what were the audience members' reactions to their information being projected onto the stage? I think I watched a video where you're talking about like people didn't really read the fine print of the waivers they were signing. So yeah, how did people react to that?
That's an important point, actually, is that we had a terms of use agreement that people had to sign if they wanted a free drink when they came in. So in order to get the free glass of wine, people signed away their right to privacy. And we were all prepared for people to be kind of angry. I think for the most part, they were just sort of shocked and amused and scared, which is really what you want. You want people to go home scared, because the thing is that we found pictures of people who don't post on social media because their friends had posted pictures of them. And I think that was the thing that really was the most impactful, is to realize that it doesn't matter in some cases if you are really careful, if your friend isn't.
Yeah, I think that really drives home the point there.
Yeah.
30 very active minutes. 3,148 calories. 2 hours. 44 minutes in. 133 beats per minute. Faster.
that, Kamala, you're part of the Opera America New Works Forum Committee. And, that especially during the pandemic, that committee is trying to steer the opera into a more equitable environment, create more access, and change the scene. And I was wondering if you see the integration of technology into the opera as an opportunity for moving opera in that direction in any way or not.
I definitely do. I mean, I think one of the things that is a barrier in a lot of ways is an idea that opera is something unreachable and that you can't understand it. And I think that the way to overcome that is just lots of opera everywhere that's easy to listen to. I like to tell this story about when I went to San Francisco for the opera conference, which was like right in 2019. So I think it was the last one in person before everything kind of shut down. I was taking a taxi from the airport and the taxi driver asked me why I was there. And I said, I'm here for an opera conference. And he says, I hate opera. And I said, oh, really? Which operas have you heard? And he says, none. Like, okay. I do think that kind of encapsulates how a lot of people think about it. They haven't actually heard it, but they know they don't like it. So I think if they could hear it, they would realize, oh, actually, when I see Beyonce's Lemonade, that's an opera. Or when I, am listening to my Andrea Bocelli, that's like opera. A lot of people love Andrea Bocelli and don't realize it's classical music. So I think to counter that, we just have to make it really available, and technology is what allows us to do that, because I mentioned this before, the reach is so much greater if you can watch something. And I think where we get hung up about it is that it's not really the live experience at all. But what it does is it gives you permission to go to the live thing. And everyone does this for concerts too. Like, you're not going to go see, again, Beyonce. You might go see Beyonce without hearing her new album. But most people, when they're deciding if they want to go see something live or not, they'll listen first. Right. And then make the decision. And we make it harder for ourselves, I think, to get people into the theater if they don't know what they're going to see.
So such a great point about people not knowing what we're talking about when we talk about opera. I actually just got that yesterday. I was like, she was asking me what's going on in the city, and I was like, opera is coming back, and she was like, I hate opera. I'm like, okay. So that's a very, very important point.
So you, in addition to composing, also do a lot of performing. You're a singer and play accordion. Could you tell us a bit about how going back and forth between the composing and the performing is? Maybe we can talk about your work in opera first, but we also wanted to ask about your band, Bombay Ricky.
Of course. So I started my career mainly focusing on singing. I studied composition, but I had a not great experience with a teacher, and so I kind of walked away from it for a while. But I continued to sing. So it's interesting because that became how I was known as a singer, doing a lot of contemporary music, some experimental jazz, that kind of thing. So as I've come back to being more of a composer, the nice thing about that is that I don't feel like I have to audition for things anymore and do projects that I'm not really interested in. Whereas, when you're making your living as a singer, you kind of have to do all of it. So I can be a lot pickier, which is great.
Yeah, and so with your group Bombay Ricky, I know you were doing things like playing covers of Bollywood songs, and you even started writing music to movies that didn't even exist, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. So we actually, that idea behind that project was from covering Ima Sumac, because one of my crises of conscience as a singer was that I'm a high soprano, and so the operatic roles that I could do were, usually young girls, and you get married or you die. Or both. And so I was kind of like, I want to do something fun. And my teacher actually at the time said, well, have you heard Ima Sumac? Because she is a coloratura soprano, but she's singing with big band mambo. And I heard it. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do. So I made some arrangements of a couple of her tunes, and then just started to see, again, talking to lots of people about the project until I found people that wanted to do it, who might be interested. And that I was working on a show with Jeff Hudgens, who's the sax player. And Jeff is interesting because he has an encyclopedic knowledge of all music. It seems like, I still play this game where I try to stump Jeff. Like, I just found this crazy record at a record store. And he's like, oh yeah, I have that. So eventually I'm going to have a record that Jeff doesn't already have, but it hasn't happened yet. So we were talking about Ima Sumac, and we sort of started to think of people who also were into this kind of eclectic mixing of styles. And Drew Fleming, the guitar player, who is also my partner, which is part of why he has to be in the band, I guess. But he's interesting too, because he grew up playing in a punk band in Dallas that was a successful part of the Dallas punk scene, but then is now a music theorist at the CUNY Grad Center, finishing his doctorate there. So again, you have these kind of like different, very eclectic influences coming together, and that's really what the band is about. And I think that's also why it made sense to look at Bollywood from the 60s in particular, because that's where you get R.D. Burman, who changes the Bollywood sound by incorporating American rock music and Latin percussion. Like, that's his thing, is Chuck Berry style guitar plus Latin percussion. So that's why we named ourselves after a cocktail. Actually, it's sort of a mix of things together that makes a new nice thing.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the piece you're writing for Ensemble Decipher, and we're really, really excited for the premiere of this piece.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about translation lately. I think partially because I was working on this tree piece and thinking about tree music, but then that brought up just the fact that we are always sort of translating between languages, between like gestural systems. I also had worked on a play over the summer that had it was really interesting because it involved making parts for the sign language interpreters, but not just as interpreters, that they were actually actors in the piece. So thinking about how do you translate that way also in terms of making something that is sound-based, but also thinking about sound as a physical manifestation and how it vibrates things. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I sort of landed on how do I make something that is performative and vocal, but not with vocalists. So that's what the piece is. It's about voice, but as sort of manifested through the technology, through the computer, instead of having actual singers. So it's kind of we'll see, it's an experiment.
Since Kama mentioned experiment and experimentation, she's also co-artistic director of Experiments in Opera, so maybe we could ask about that as well.
Yes. So I joined Experiments in Opera, I think at the end of 2018. It was started by 3 classmates at Wesleyan, and one of them had just departed. He moved to San Francisco, and so he had kind of stepped back, and they realized that it might be time to diversify a little bit. So they asked me to come in, and I've sort of taken that as my mandate, is to help them to become a more diverse organization. And so I'm really proud and excited of the work that we have done. It's a very small company with a small budget, and yet we were able to pivot in the pandemic, which this is sort of the first thing that happened under my tenure, was that everything shut down. So we had to figure out what we were going to do. But we had been working on something we are calling the writer's room, which is a new sort of more collaborative model for creating opera, where we had a writer's room of librettists, which is inspired by the way that TV writer's room works, that they create sort of a show Bible together that's all of the characters, who they are, where they live, the sort of basic outline of what has to happen in the piece. And then it was broken down into 10 episodes, and each writer would write an episode, come back to the group, workshop it, make revisions, come back to the group. So it was really all of the writers together creating the world of the piece. And I think because of that, it has a more universal perspective than it might have if it was just one writer. And then similarly, we had 10 composers each write one episode of the piece. So it's this giant thing, which we were going to do, and then the pandemic shut everything down. So we decided to take the model of the writer's room and make a podcast with it. And we had 4 librettists and 5 composers, and that podcast is called Aquanet and Funyuns, and it came out last December. And it's great because, again, Experiments in Opera is a small company. We were going to do these shows at the Flea Theater, which I think the big space is 100 seats. So 6 shows, 100 seats, 600 audience members, where we have already had something like 14,000 downloads of the podcast opera.
Wow.
So it's much, much greater reach to put things online. And so now that we're coming back to the big piece again, we made the decision, since it's inspired by TV, why not make it actually more like TV? So we are shooting it and making it a film instead of doing it as a live piece. We are actually in the process of recording that right now.
That's great, and good to hear that it was so successful. And we'll be sure to link to the podcast in the show notes so people can check it out if they want to hear more. Thank you so much, Kamala, for coming on the podcast. Before we finish up, can you just let people know where they can go to learn more about you and listen to your music?
Yes. My website is kamalasankaram.com. And my tree piece is actually up in Prospect Park right now. It's running Thursday through Sunday from 8 to 6 until October 10th.
Thank you so much, Kamala.
Yes, nice to see you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Decipher This. Special thanks to Kamala for joining us today. Your hosts are Niloufar and Nourbakhsh.
And Joy Bohigian.
And the episode was edited and produced by Joey Bohigian. We hope to see you at one of our upcoming concerts in November as part of our New York State tour.